The deafening crack of thunder split the night as Richard Holloway's silhouette disappeared into the darkness. His wife's desperate cries echoed behind him. "Richard, please, don't leave us." Their children huddled together in the remnants of their collapsed tent, rain lashing against their faces as they watched their father, a man worth millions, abandon them to save himself. The family's prized horse, Midnight, reared up suddenly, breaking free from his restraints. What no one knew in that moment of betrayal was that this animal would become their only hope for survival in the merciless wilderness that had revealed the true nature of the man they once trusted with their lives. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. "This isn't what I signed up for," Richard Holloway muttered, checking his gold Rolex as his family packed their camping supplies into the luxury SUV. At 4 to 5, Richard was a self-made tech mogul who'd built his fortune creating security software for major corporations. His classic good looks were maintained by regular sessions with personal trainers and the best skincare money could buy. Even dressed in what he considered roughing it attire, his clothes were designer outdoor wear that had never seen actual wilderness before this trip. His wife, Claire, was securing their children's backpacks with practiced efficiency. At 42, she maintained a graceful elegance despite the years. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup for the camping trip. Unlike her husband, Claire had grown up camping with her middle-class family and had insisted on continuing the tradition with their own children. "Dad, can you help me with this sleeping bag?" asked 12-year-old Lily, struggling with the compression straps. Her long brown hair fell in her face as she fought with the stubborn material. Richard sighed dramatically. "Can't you handle it yourself? I'm checking our route." He didn't look up from his phone, where he was examining the exclusive campsite he'd booked in Whispering Pines National Park. He'd paid extra for a premium location, whatever that meant in the wilderness. Claire shot in a disappointed glance but said nothing, moving to help Lily instead. 10-year-old James was already exploring the area around their driveway, his curious blue eyes taking in every detail of a beetle making its way across the concrete. "Mom, look at this!" he called, his voice filled with wonder. "That's great, buddy," Claire responded warmly, finishing with Lily's sleeping bag before walking over to admire his discovery. Richard rolled his eyes. "It's just a bug, James. We're going to be surrounded by those disgusting things soon enough." Claire's smile faltered, but she kept her voice light. "That's kind of the point of camping, honey, connecting with nature." "Nature could have connected with us at the Four Seasons Mountain Resort," Richard grumbled, thinking of the 5-star accommodations he'd suggested as an alternative. "They have guided nature walks and return you to Egyptian cotton sheets afterward." "But Dad, you promised we'd go real camping this year," Lily reminded him, her voice tinged with the stubbornness she'd inherited from him. "You said you'd teach us to fish and everything." Richard's face softened slightly at his daughter's enthusiasm. "I know, Princess, and I will." Though he had absolutely no idea how to fish, having grown up in urban environments his entire life. He'd watched a few YouTube videos last night and figured it couldn't be that hard. The final member of their family expedition was being led from the stable by the groundskeeper. Midnight, a magnificent black Frisian horse, was Claire's pride and joy. She'd grown up riding and had competed in equestrian events through college. When they bought their sprawling estate outside of Denver 5 years ago, the first addition Claire had insisted on was stables for a horse. "I still don't understand why we're bringing that animal," Richard said, eyeing the horse with suspicion. "The campsite has those posts for them, right?" "Hitching posts," Claire corrected patiently. "And yes, they do. Whispering Pines is known for their equestrian-friendly trails. Midnight will love it, and the kids can practice riding." Richard watched as Claire lovingly stroked the horse's muzzle. The animal nuzzled against her hand with obvious affection. Something uncomfortable twisted in Richard's chest. Was it jealousy? The horse seemed to have a connection with his wife that he himself had been lacking lately. Their marriage had been strained for the past year. Richard's company had expanded internationally, and he'd been traveling constantly, missing school events and family dinners. This camping trip was Claire's idea, a chance to reconnect as a family without the distractions of technology and work. Richard had agreed reluctantly, more to appease Claire than out of any desire to sleep on the ground. He'd secretly packed his satellite phone and laptop, planning to check in with the office when everyone was asleep. The horse trailer was hitched to their SUV, the camping gear was loaded, and the children were buckled into their seats. Claire gave Richard a hopeful smile as she climbed into the passenger seat. "This is going to be good for us," she said softly, reaching for his hand. Richard nodded, squeezing her fingers briefly before starting the engine. 3 days in the wilderness. What could possibly go wrong? He joked, unaware of how prophetic his words would prove to be. The drive to Whispering Pines National Park took just over 2 hours. As they left the Denver suburbs behind, the landscape shifted to rolling hills and eventually the majestic peaks of the Rocky Mountains. The children's excitement grew with each mile, their faces pressed against the windows as they pointed out wildlife and interesting rock formations. Richard's mood improved somewhat as they drove. The scenery was undeniably beautiful, and Claire's hand resting on his leg reminded him of simpler times in their relationship. "Remember when we took that road trip to California?" he asked, glancing at her. "Just after we got engaged?" Claire's eyes lit up. "That tiny motel in Nevada with the neon cowboy sign?" "And the shower that only had cold water," Richard laughed. "We were so broke then." "But happy," Claire said softly. "We didn't need much." Richard's smile faded slightly. "We worked hard for what we have now." "I know," Claire assured him. "And I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I just miss you sometimes, that's all." Before Richard could respond, James called from the back seat. "Dad, look, there's the park entrance." The large wooden sign for Whispering Pines National Park loomed ahead, carved with intricate details of local wildlife and landscapes. Richard turned into the entrance, following signs to the visitor center to check in. The ranger at the welcome desk was a weathered man in his 50s with sun-creased skin and a friendly smile. "Welcome to Whispering Pines. Name for your reservation?" "Holloway," Richard stated. "Premium campsite." The ranger checked his computer. "Ah, yes. Campsite 42, one of our equestrian sites. Nice choice." He handed Richard a map and pointed out their location. "You folks picked an interesting weekend to come camping." "What do you mean?" Claire asked, a note of concern in her voice. "Weather Service is tracking a storm system moving in tomorrow afternoon. Might get pretty intense by evening." The ranger shrugged. "Nothing unusual for this time of year, but wanted to give you a heads up." Richard frowned. "How intense are we talking?" "Strong thunderstorms, heavy rain. Winds could gust up to 40 miles per hour." The ranger studied Richard's expensive outdoor gear and pristine hiking boots. "First time camping?" "No," Richard lied, his pride stung by the question. "We'll be fine." Claire gave him a searching look but didn't contradict him. "We appreciate the warning. Should we consider rescheduling?" The ranger waved a hand. "Many experienced campers stay through these storms. Your site is in a good location, not too many tall trees around, so lightning shouldn't be a concern. Just make sure your tent is secured properly, and you might want to set up a rainfly for extra protection." Richard nodded confidently, although he had no idea what a rainfly was. "We're well prepared." After completing their check-in and receiving a park pamphlet with emergency numbers, they drove to their assigned campsite. The premium designation was apparent in the spacious clearing surrounded by pine trees, with a large fire pit, picnic table, and the promised hitching post for midnight. "This is awesome!" James exclaimed, tumbling out of the car before it had fully stopped. "Stay where we can see you," Claire called after him, then turned to Richard. "Should we set up the tent first?" Richard opened the trunk, staring at the rolled-up canvas and poles with apprehension. The tent had seemed straightforward when he'd practiced setting it up in their backyard last weekend. Of course, he'd had the gardener helping him then. "Let's get the horse situated first," he suggested, stalling for time. Claire nodded and went to the trailer to unload Midnight. The horse stepped down gracefully, nostrils flaring as he took in the scents of the forest. Claire led him to the hitching post and secured him with enough lead rope to allow him to graze comfortably. "He seems happy," Lily observed, stroking the horse's sleek neck. Horses love being outdoors, Claire explained. It's in their nature. Richard tackled the tent next, attempting to follow the instructions while maintaining his dignity. After 30 frustrating minutes and several failed attempts, the tent was erected, albeit somewhat lopsided. Claire bit back a smile. Want some help straightening that side? I've got it, Richard insisted, tugging at a pole that refused to stay in place. By the time the campsite was fully set up, with sleeping bags arranged inside the tent and camping chairs positioned around the fire pit, the afternoon sun was dipping toward the mountains. Richard had managed to start a fire using far more matches than an experienced camper would need, but he felt a surge of primitive pride as the flames caught and grew. Who wants hot dogs? Claire asked, pulling out the food supplies from their cooler. Me! Both children shouted, rushing to help. Richard sat back in his chair, watching his family move around the campsite with easy familiarity. Claire was in her element, showing the children how to roast hot dogs without burning them, her laughter carrying on the mountain breeze. The children's faces glowed with excitement and firelight. Richard felt oddly disconnected from the scene, as if watching a movie featuring his family rather than being part of it. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Despite promising Claire he wouldn't work during this trip, he discreetly checked the message. It was from his VP of Operations. Urgent issue with the Singapore expansion. Need your input ASAP. Richard glanced at his family, now making s'mores and completely engrossed in their activity. He quietly rose and stepped away from the fire pit. This better be important, Marcus, he said when his call was answered. Sorry, boss, but the Singapore team is threatening to walk if we don't renegotiate their contract. They've got another offer. Richard paced at the edge of the campsite, lowering his voice. Tell them they signed an exclusive agreement. If they walk, our lawyers will bury them. I tried that approach. They're not budging. Richard ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Fine. Offer them an additional 5% equity stake, but not a penny more in salary. And make it clear this is a one-time concession. Will do. How's the great outdoors? Richard glanced back at his family. Claire was watching him with a knowing look. Gotta go, he said, ending the call. He returned to the fire pit, where Claire handed him a perfectly toasted marshmallow sandwiched between chocolate and graham crackers. Everything okay at the office? She asked, her tone carefully neutral. Just a minor issue, Richard replied, taking a bite of the s'more. The sweet, sticky combination melted in his mouth. This is actually pretty good. The secret is getting the marshmallow golden brown, not burnt, James explained seriously. As darkness fell, the family huddled closer to the fire. Claire pointed out constellations to the children, her knowledge of the night sky impressing even Richard. How do you know all this? He asked. My dad taught me, she replied softly. Every summer, when we went camping. Richard felt a pang of regret. His own father had been too busy building his accounting firm to take vacations. By the time he'd achieved success, Richard was already in college, too occupied with his own ambitions to spend time with his parents. His father had died of a heart attack 2 years ago, leaving behind a substantial inheritance, but few shared memories. I'm glad you're sharing these traditions with our kids, he said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. Claire's eyes reflected the firelight as she smiled at him. It means a lot to hear you say that. Later, as they prepared for bed, Richard noticed Midnight shifting restlessly at his hitching post. Is he okay? He asked Claire, nodding toward the horse. Claire frowned slightly. He seems a bit uneasy. Animals can sense changes in weather patterns before we can. The storm the ranger mentioned? Probably. Let me check his tether and make sure he has enough shelter under those trees. Richard watched as Claire soothed the animal, speaking in soft tones and stroking his muzzle. The horse calmed under her touch, though his ears remained alert, occasionally swiveling toward the distant mountains. In the tent, with the children already asleep in their sleeping bags, Richard found himself staring at the canvas ceiling, listening to the night sounds of the forest. The ground was harder than he'd expected, despite the expensive sleeping pad he'd purchased. Can't sleep? Claire whispered beside him. Just adjusting, he replied. It's peaceful here. Claire's hand found his in the darkness. "Thank you for doing this. I know it's not your idea of a vacation." Richard squeezed her fingers. "Maybe it's growing on me." Claire shifted closer, her body warm against his. "I've missed this," she murmured. "Just being with you, without distractions." Richard turned toward her, suddenly very aware of her proximity. "The kids are right here," he whispered, nodding toward the sleeping forms of Lily and James. "They're sound asleep," Claire replied, her voice taking on a playful tone he hadn't heard in months. "And they've been through enough sex ed classes to know where babies come from if they did wake up." Richard laughed softly, surprising himself. "Mrs. Holloway, are you suggesting we fool around in a tent?" Claire's hand slid beneath his t-shirt. "I'm suggesting we remember what it was like when we were too poor for hotel rooms and had to get creative." Outside, the wind had begun to pick up, rustling the trees and providing a natural soundtrack that masked their quiet lovemaking. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Richard was fully present with his wife, not thinking about work or checking the time. They moved together in the familiar rhythm of long-term lovers who still had the capacity to surprise each other. Afterward, with Claire's head resting on his chest, Richard found himself reflecting on their life together. When had he started taking her for granted? When had the pursuit of success become more important than these moments of connection? "I'm sorry I've been distant," he murmured into her hair. Claire propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the dim light filtering through the tent. "Are you feeling okay? First camping, now apologies. Who are you, and what have you done with my husband?" she teased. Richard smiled, pulling her back down beside him. "Maybe the mountain air is affecting me." "Whatever it is, I like it," Claire whispered, nestling against him. As they drifted off to sleep, the wind continued to strengthen, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled faintly, heralding the approaching storm. Morning brought clear skies that belied the forecast. Richard awoke to the sounds of birds and the smell of coffee brewing. He emerged from the tent to find Claire already up, tending to a small camp stove while the children fed midnight chunks of apple. "Sleep well?" Claire asked, handing him a steaming mug. Richard stretched, surprised to find he actually had. "Better than expected." "Good, because we have a full day planned. I thought we'd hike to Silver Lake this morning. It's about 3 miles from here, and there's supposed to be great fishing." Richard sipped his coffee, trying to hide his apprehension about the fishing part. "Sounds good. What about the storm?" Claire glanced at the clear blue sky. "The ranger said afternoon, so we should be fine if we get back by lunch. We can secure everything at the campsite before it hits." After a breakfast of oatmeal and dried fruit, they packed day packs with water, snacks, and first aid supplies. Claire checked on Midnight one more time, making sure he had fresh water and enough lead rope to move freely within a safe area. "He'll be okay while we're gone?" Richard asked, feeling oddly concerned about the animal. "He's used to being on his own in the paddock at home," Claire assured him. "He's got shade, water, and plenty of grass to munch on. We won't be gone long." The hike to Silver Lake was pleasant, following a well-marked trail that wound through pine forests and open meadows dotted with wildflowers. James ran ahead, his energy seemingly boundless, while Lily walked alongside Claire, asking questions about the various plants they passed. Richard found himself enjoying the physical exertion and clean mountain air. In the city, his exercise came from carefully scheduled sessions with his personal trainer in the climate-controlled gym of his office building. This was different. Unpredictable terrain, changing elevations, the scent of pine and earth surrounding them. By the time they reached Silver Lake, a pristine alpine lake nestled in a natural bowl of mountains, Richard was genuinely impressed by the beauty before them. The water was crystal clear, reflecting the blue sky and surrounding peaks like a mirror. "Wow," he breathed, setting down his pack. "Worth the hike?" Claire asked, smiling at his reaction. "Definitely." Richard watched as James immediately began collecting rocks to skip across the water's surface. "This is incredible." "Can we fish now, Dad?" Lily asked, her eyes bright with anticipation. Richard swallowed hard, looking at the collapsible fishing rods they brought. "Sure, Princess. Let's see what we can catch." To his surprise and relief, fishing proved less complicated than he'd feared. Claire subtly guided him through baiting the hooks and casting, and soon all four of them were sitting on the lakeshore, lines in the water. "The key is patience," Claire told the children. "Fish don't operate on human schedules." Richard smiled at this. "Unlike the business world, where everything is about deadlines and hitting targets." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Maybe you could learn something from the fish." Before Richard could respond, Lily's rod bent sharply. "I got something!" she shrieked, jumping to her feet. "Hold on tight," Claire called, moving to help her. "Don't jerk the rod, just reel slowly and steadily." Richard and James watched in excitement as Lily, with Claire's guidance, reeled in a decent-sized rainbow trout. The fish thrashed at the end of a line, its scales glinting in the sunlight. "You did it!" Richard exclaimed, genuinely proud of his daughter's achievement. Claire helped Lily remove the hook and held the fish for her to see up close. "Do you want to keep it for dinner or let it go?" Lily considered for a moment, looking at the beautiful creature. "Let it go," she decided. "It has a family too." Claire nodded approvingly and showed Lily how to release the fish back into the lake. The trout swam away with a flick of its tail, disappearing into the depths. James was next to catch a fish, smaller than Lily's, but still a source of immense pride. Richard managed to hook something that got away before he could reel it in, which the children found hilarious. "Biggest fish always get away," Claire consoled him with a wink. As the morning progressed, Richard found himself completely engaged in the moment, his phone forgotten in his backpack. The children's laughter, the peaceful surroundings, Claire's obvious joy at sharing this experience with them all, combined to create a sense of contentment he rarely felt in his daily life. It wasn't until they had packed up to return to the campsite that Richard noticed the change in the sky. Dark clouds were building over the western mountains, moving with surprising speed toward them. "We should head back," he said, a note of concern in his voice. "That doesn't look good." Claire glanced at the approaching storm front, her expression turning serious. "You're right, that's moving faster than the forecast suggested." They hurried the children along the trail, moving at a much quicker pace than their leisurely morning hike. The wind had picked up significantly, bending the tops of the pine trees and sending loose leaves swirling around them. "How far are we from the campsite?" Richard asked as they crossed a small wooden bridge over a bubbling stream. "About a mile," Claire replied, helping Lily over a fallen log blocking part of the path. "We should make it before the worst hits." The first drops of rain began to fall when they were halfway back, large, cold splatters that quickly increased in intensity. By the time the campsite came into view, the rain was coming down in sheets, and the first rumble of thunder echoed across the valley. Midnight was agitated, pulling at his tether and whinnying anxiously. Claire rushed to him while Richard hurried the children toward the tent. "Get inside and stay there," he instructed. "I'll help your mother." Claire was trying to calm the horse, stroking his neck and speaking soothingly, but Midnight continued to stamp and snort. "He's scared of the storm," she called to Richard over the increasing wind. "We need to move him to more sheltered ground." Together, they led the nervous animal to a small grove of trees that offered some protection from the rain and wind. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Midnight reared up, nearly pulling the lead rope from Claire's hands. "Easy, boy," she murmured, maintaining her grip. "It's okay." Richard helped secure the horse to a sturdy tree, making sure the rope was tight, but allowed the animal enough freedom to move comfortably. "Will he be all right out here?" Claire nodded, rain streaming down her face. "He's better off than in an open area. The trees will provide some protection without being tall enough to attract lightning." They ran back to the tent, where Lily and James were huddled in their sleeping bags, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Is Midnight okay?" Lily asked as they ducked inside. "He's fine, just a little spooked," Claire assured her, wringing water from her hair. "Horses don't like thunder." Richard changed into dry clothes and helped Claire secure the tent flaps against the intensifying rain. The canvas sides billowed alarmingly as gusts of wind battered their shelter. "Is the tent supposed to move that much?" he asked quietly. not wanting to frighten the children. Claire's face was tense. Not ideally. I'm worried about those stakes, if they pull loose. Another flash of lightning illuminated the inside of the tent, followed by a crack of thunder so loud it seemed to shake the ground. James whimpered and burrowed deeper into his sleeping bag. "It's okay, buddy," Richard said, moving to sit beside his son. "It's just a storm. It'll pass." But as the minutes ticked by, the storm only intensified. The rain hammered against the canvas with brutal force, and the wind howled through the trees surrounding their campsite. Richard could hear branches breaking and falling nearby. "Maybe we should try to leave," he suggested to Claire. "Drive back to the visitor center or find a ranger station." Claire shook her head. "It's too dangerous to travel in this. We have to pack everything up in the storm, and the trails might be washed down already. We're safer staying put." A particularly violent gust of wind hit the tent, partially collapsing one side. Water began to seep through at the edges of the ground sheet. "The stake's coming loose," Claire said, moving quickly to the affected corner. "Richard, help me hold this." Richard pressed his body against the sagging canvas, while Claire attempted to secure the stake more firmly. The wind was so strong it took all their combined effort to keep the tent from collapsing entirely. "I'm scared," Lily whispered, clutching her brother's hand. Richard was about to reassure her when a sound like a gunshot rang out above the storm. A massive tree branch crashed down just feet from their tent, sending a shower of pine needles and smaller branches across their campsite. Claire's face went pale. "We need to move. Now." "Where?" Richard asked, panic rising in his chest. "You just said it was too dangerous to travel." "The car," Claire decided. "It's safer than the tent. We can wait out the storm there." They rushed to gather essential items: flashlights, phones, extra clothes, water. Claire wrapped the children in their rain jackets and prepared to make a dash for the SUV parked about 30 yards from their tent. "What about midnight?" Lily cried, resisting as her mother tried to guide her toward the tent entrance. "I'll check on him once you're safely in the car," Claire promised. Richard peered out at the chaos beyond their flimsy shelter. The campsite was barely recognizable, with debris scattered everywhere and small rivulets of water creating impromptu streams across the ground. The car seemed impossibly far away through the curtain of rain. "I'll go first," he said, taking a deep breath. "That I'll come back for James. And you take Lily." Claire nodded, her expression grim but determined. Richard steeled himself and plunged into the storm. The force of the wind nearly knocked him off his feet. Rain lashed his face with such intensity and felt like needles against his skin. He stumbled forward, slipping in the mud, focusing solely on reaching the SUV. After what seemed like an eternity, his hand closed around the door handle. He yanked it open and climbed inside, gasping for breath. The interior of the vehicle was dry and quiet compared to the mayhem outside. Richard took a moment to collect himself, then looked back toward the tent. He could barely make out the shapes of his family through the downpour. Gathering his courage, he opened the door to head back. At that exact moment, lightning struck a tall pine tree at the edge of their campsite. The blinding flash was followed by a sound like the world splitting open. Richard watched in horror as the tree toppled, its massive trunk falling directly toward their tent. "No!" he screamed, the word torn from his throat. The tree missed the tent by mere feet, but the impact sent a shower of broken branches across their campsite. One large limb tore through the tent canvas, partially collapsing the structure. Richard's heart pounded in his chest as he saw Claire emerge from the damaged tent, helping both children out. They were alive. Relief flooded through him, quickly followed by paralyzing fear as another branch crashed down nearby. Claire looked toward the car, spotted Richard, and began guiding the children in his direction. She was shouting something, but the wind carried her words away. Richard knew he should go to them, help them reach the car safely, but his body wouldn't move. His feet seemed rooted to the ground as another lightning bolt illuminated the sky. Terror gripped him, primal and overwhelming. Images flashed through his mind. His colleague who'd been struck by lightning during a golf tournament, left with permanent nerve damage. News reports of campers killed by falling trees during storms. His own father, found alone in his office after his heart attack. No one there to help him. In that moment of blinding fear, Richard made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He closed the car door, locked it, and pressed himself against the seat, eyes squeezed shut, waiting for the storm to pass. Outside, Claire stared in disbelief as she saw the car door close. "Richard!" she screamed, struggling to hold onto both children as the wind threatened to tear them from her grasp. "Richard!" But there was no response, no sign of movement from the vehicle. Claire's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Had he been injured? Was he coming back for them? Or had he just left them? The reality of their situation crashed over her like the relentless rain. They were alone, their shelter damaged, and the storm was worsening. Claire fought back tears, knowing she needed to stay strong for the children. "Mom, where's Dad going?" James shouted over the wind, watching the SUV's headlights suddenly illuminate. Claire couldn't find words to answer as the vehicle's engine roared to life. She watched, stunned, as the SUV began to back up, turning around in the muddy campground. Richard was leaving, actually leaving them in the middle of this nightmare. He's going to get help," she lied, her voice breaking. "We need to find shelter." Their tent was now completely collapsed, offering no protection. Claire scanned the area desperately, trying to think clearly through her shock and fear. The campsite's small wooden bathroom structure was too far, and the path to it crossed an open area where they'd be exposed to lightning. Then she remembered midnight. The horse was sheltered in a grove of trees that might offer some protection. "This way," she called to the children, guiding them toward where she'd left the horse. They stumbled through mud and rain, Claire holding tightly to both children's hands. The wind threatened to knock them down with each gust, and branches continued to fall around them. Lily was crying openly now, her small body shaking with cold and fear. When they reached the grove of trees, Claire was relieved to find Midnight still there, though clearly agitated. The horse whinnied and stamped as they approached, but seemed to calm slightly at the sight of familiar faces. "We're going to stay here with Midnight," Claire explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "These trees will give us some protection, and he'll help keep us warm." She positioned the children on the sheltered side of the horse, using her own body to shield them from the worst of the wind. Midnight, sensing their distress, remained surprisingly still, his large body providing a windbreak. "Where's Dad really going?" Lily asked, her voice small and frightened. Claire swallowed hard, fighting back tears. How could she explain to her children that their father had abandoned them? "I don't know, sweetie, but we're going to be okay. I promise." As the storm raged around them, Claire's mind raced with possibilities. Their phones had no signal in this remote area. The rangers knew they were at this campsite, but wouldn't check on them unless they missed their checkout time, which was still 2 days away. Other campers might be nearby, but in this weather, no one would be out searching. They were effectively alone, with no shelter, no transportation, and no means of communication. And Richard, the man she had loved and trusted for 15 years, had driven away, leaving them to face the fury of nature without him. Hours passed, the storm maintaining its intensity as darkness fell. Claire had managed to create a makeshift shelter using a small tarp from her backpack, securing it between trees to give them some protection from the rain. The children huddled against her, exhausted and frightened, but finally sleeping. Midnight stood nearby, occasionally shaking his mane to dislodge accumulated rainwater, but otherwise stoically enduring the weather. Claire watched the horse through bleary eyes, grateful for his steady presence. "At least you didn't abandon us," she whispered. Her thoughts turned to Richard, cycling through disbelief, rage, and heartbreak. How could he have left them? What kind of man leaves his family to die in a storm? The Richard she married would never have done such a thing. When had he changed so fundamentally, or had she simply never truly known him? Claire's body ached from the cold, and from maintaining her protective position around the children. She knew they needed better shelter, food, and dry clothes soon. The storm had to break eventually, and when it did, they would need to find help. As these thoughts swirled in her mind, Claire noticed something strange. Midnight had turned his head, ears perked forward, listening intently. The horse tugged at his tether, whinnying softly. "What is it, boy?" Claire murmured, following his gaze into the darkness. She couldn't see or hear anything beyond the constant patter of rain and wind. Midnight pulled harder at his rope, clearly agitated but in a different way than his earlier fear of the storm. This seemed more purposeful, as if he sensed something important. An idea began to form in Claire's mind. Horses had incredible instincts, often sensing dangers or opportunities that humans missed. Was it possible that Midnight could help them find a way out of this situation? Claire carefully extricated herself from the sleeping children and moved to untie Midnight's lead rope from the tree. The horse snorted, shaking his head as if in approval. "I'm going to try something crazy," Claire whispered to him, stroking his wet muzzle. "But first, I need to make sure the kids will be okay." She secured the tarp more firmly, creating a small cocoon around Lily and James, and placed her backpack under their heads as a pillow. They stirred but didn't wake, exhausted from the ordeal. Claire tied one end of the long cord from her pack to the tarp and the other to her wrist. If the children woke and moved, she would feel it. Then she took Midnight's lead rope and stepped away from their makeshift shelter. "Okay, boy," she said softly. "Show me what you're sensing." Midnight pulled gently but insistently, leading Claire away from their shelter. The rain had lessened slightly, though the wind still whipped through the trees. Claire followed cautiously, keeping the cord to the children's shelter taut in her hand, ready to rush back at the slightest tug. The horse moved with surprising confidence through the darkness, avoiding fallen branches and treacherous mud patches. Claire had to trust his superior night vision and instincts as they moved deeper into the forest, away from the devastated campsite. After about 10 minutes of careful navigation, Midnight stopped suddenly, lifting his head and nickering softly. Claire strained her eyes, trying to see what had caught the horse's attention. Through the rain and gloom, she made out what appeared to be a structure of some kind. As they drew closer, Claire realized it was a small cabin, its windows dark but clearly a man-made shelter. Hope surged within her. Perhaps it was a ranger outpost or an emergency shelter. "Good boy," she whispered to Midnight, stroking his wet neck gratefully. "You magnificent animal." Claire approached the cabin cautiously. There were no vehicles outside, no signs of current occupation. She knocked firmly on the door, but received no answer. Testing the handle, she found it unlocked. "Hello?" she called, pushing the door open. "Is anyone here?" The cabin was empty, but appeared to be a maintenance shelter for park staff. A small wood stove sat cold in one corner. There were basic supplies on shelves, emergency rations, bottled water, first aid kit, and most importantly, a radio. Claire quickly tied Midnight to the porch railing, promising to return for him, then hurried back to her children, following the cord she'd tied to her wrist. The discovery of the cabin had filled her with renewed strength and purpose. When she reached their makeshift shelter, both children were still sleeping. Claire gently woke them, her voice barely containing her excitement. "Lily, James, wake up. Midnight found us a cabin. We're going to be okay." James rubbed his eyes sleepily. "A cabin? Like with a roof?" Claire laughed, the sound strange after hours of fear and desperation. "Yes, with a roof and walls and everything. Can you both walk a little farther?" Lily nodded bravely, though her lips were blue with cold. "Is Daddy there?" The question pierced Claire's heart. "No, sweetie, but there's a radio, and we can call for help." She helped the children to their feet, gathered their few belongings, and guided them along the path she'd just traveled with Midnight. The horse nickered in greeting when they approached the cabin, and Lily immediately went to hug his neck despite her exhaustion. "Midnight found this place?" James asked, looking at the horse with new respect. "He sure did," Claire confirmed. "He's a hero." Once inside, Claire quickly assessed their resources. The wood stove would provide heat if she could get it started. She found matches and kindling, and soon had a small fire burning. There were emergency blankets in a cabinet, which she wrapped around the shivering children. Next, she turned her attention to the radio. It was an older model, but appeared to be in working order. Claire adjusted the frequency to the emergency channel listed on a laminated card next to the device. "This is Claire Holloway at Whispering Pines National Park. Campsite 42. She spoke clearly into the microphone. We have an emergency situation. My 2 children and I are stranded at what appears to be a maintenance cabin somewhere northeast of our campsite. Our tent was destroyed in the storm, and we need assistance. Wah. Static crackled for a moment before a voice responded. This is Ranger Station Alpha receiving your transmission. Are there any injuries in your party? No injuries, but we're cold and wet. My children are 10 and 12. Copy that. Based on your campsite location and direction, I believe you found emergency shelter 3. Stay where you are. We'll dispatch rangers to your location as soon as it's safe to travel. The storm is expected to continue for several more hours. Claire felt tears of relief sting her eyes. Thank you. There's one more thing, our horse is with us. He's outside on the porch. Understood. There should be a small lean-to attached to the back of the cabin where you can shelter the animal. Is there anything else we should know? Claire hesitated, unsure how to explain Richard's abandonment. My husband, he left in our vehicle during the storm. I don't know where he is. There was a brief pause. Copy that. We'll keep an eye out for him. For now, focus on keeping warm and dry. Check in every hour on this channel, or immediately if your situation changes. Will do. Thank you. Claire set down the radio and turned to find both children watching her intently. She forced a smile. The Rangers are coming to help us. We just need to wait out the storm. What about Dad? James asked, his young face serious beyond his years. Claire sat down beside them on the small cot that served as the cabin's only furniture. I don't know where Dad is right now. He got scared in the storm. But he left us, Lily said, her voice small but certain. It wasn't a question. Claire pulled both children close, choosing her words carefully. Yes, he did. And that was wrong of him. But right now, we need to focus on staying safe until help arrives. Midnight didn't leave us, James observed, looking toward the door where they could hear the horse moving on the breed. Porch. He helped us. That's right, Claire agreed, grateful for the opening. And that's what we're going to focus on, who stayed to help, not who left. She rose and checked the back of the cabin, finding the lienta the ranger had mentioned. It was a simple structure, but would provide better shelter for midnight than the open porch. Claire brought the horse around and settled him in the small space, making sure he had enough room to move comfortably. Thank you, she whispered to the animal, resting her forehead briefly against his damp neck. We wouldn't have made it without you. Inside, she found the children exploring the cabin's supplies. James had discovered a stack of emergency ration bars, while Lily was examining a small bookshelf containing maps and nature guides. Mom, look, Lily called, holding up a map. This shows all the emergency shelters in the park. We're here. She pointed to a small square marked AS3 on the map. Claire studied the map with interest. The cabin was indeed northeast of their campsite, about a mile into the forest. No wonder they hadn't known it was there. It wasn't on the visitor maps, only on the emergency response charts. Good find, Lily. This will help us understand where we are. As the night wore on, the storm gradually began to subside. The thunder became more distant, the rain less intense. Claire maintained hourly contact with the ranger station as instructed, each check-in boosting their spirits as they counted down to rescue. The children eventually fell asleep on the cot, huddled together under emergency blankets. Claire sat beside them, listening to the diminishing storm and contemplating the shattered pieces of her life. Where was Richard now? Had he made it safely out of the park? Or had the storm caught him on the narrow mountain roads? Despite her anger and sense of betrayal, she found herself hoping he was safe. Not for his sake, but for the children's. They had already experienced one devastating abandonment. They didn't need to face the permanent loss of their father as well. Morning arrived with tentative sunlight filtering through the cabin's small windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sodden landscape littered with debris. Claire stepped onto the porch to check on Midnight, finding the horse alert and seemingly no worse for wear after their ordeal. The Rangers should be here soon, she told him, stroking his muzzle. You're going to get extra apples when we get home. Inside, the children were awake, sharing an emergency ration bar for breakfast. Their clothes had mostly dried overnight thanks to the wood stove, and their spirits seemed to have recovered somewhat with the return of daylight. "Mom, I was thinking," James said between bites. "Do you think we could keep camping after they rescue us? At a different spot, I mean." Claire blinked in surprise. "You want to continue the trip? After everything that happened?" James nodded solemnly. "We were having fun before the storm. And we know what to do better now, right? Plus, we have midnight to help us if we get in trouble again." Lily nodded in agreement. "I don't want to go home yet. Dad ruined our trip, and that's not fair." Claire felt a surge of pride in her children's resilience, even as her heart ached at the casual acknowledgement of their father's betrayal. "We'll see what the Rangers say. Our tent was pretty damaged." The radio crackled to life. "Emergency Shelter 3. This is Ranger Mitchell. Do you copy?" Claire hurried to respond. "Yes, we're here. All safe and dry. Good to hear. I'm about half a mile from your location with a rescue team. Should be there in about 15 minutes. We'll be ready." True to his word, Ranger Mitchell arrived shortly after, accompanied by 2 other rangers. They hiked in, as the trails were still too muddy and debris-strewn for vehicles. "Mrs. Holloway?" A tall, broad-shouldered man in a park ranger uniform approached the cabin. "I'm Head Ranger Mitchell. These are Rangers Cardoza and Lynn. Glad to see you all safe and sound." Claire shook his offered hand. "We're so grateful you came. And please, call me Claire." Ranger Mitchell nodded, then knelt to address the children. "You must be James and Lily. You two have been very brave." The children straightened at his words, clearly pleased by the recognition. "It was mostly Midnight who was brave," Lily said, pointing to the horse. "He found this place." Ranger Mitchell raised his eyebrows, looking impressed. "Is that so? Well, I'd say you have a pretty special horse there." He turned back to Claire, his expression becoming more serious. "About your husband, we've been in contact with the sheriff's department. Mr. Holloway showed up at the visitor center late last night, extremely distressed. He told them there had been an accident at your campsite, and that he believed you and the children had been, well, that you hadn't survived when a tree fell on your tent." Claire felt a complex mixture of emotions, relief that Richard was alive, anger at his assumption, and a bitter amusement that he'd already constructed a narrative to justify his abandonment. "As you can see, we're very much alive," she said evenly. "The tree missed the tent, though it did damage it." "Richard left in the car during the height of the storm." Ranger Mitchell's expression revealed nothing, but his eyes held understanding. "I see. Well, Mr. Holloway is at the ranger station now. He's been quite distraught, refused to leave until a search party was organized. With the storm, we couldn't send anyone out until it passed." "Of course," Claire nodded. "I understand. We can take you to the station now, or directly to town if you prefer." Claire glanced at her children, remembering their request. "Actually, the kids were hoping we might be able to continue our camping trip. I know our site is probably a mess, but is there any possibility of relocating to another area? Our tent was damaged, but maybe there are cabins available?" Ranger Mitchell looked surprised but pleased. "There are a few park cabins that might be available. Not as fancy as your original campsite, but they're sturdy and have basic amenities. I can check for you." "We'd appreciate that." As the Rangers helped them prepare to leave, Claire noticed James whispering something to Ranger Lynn while pointing at Midnight. The female ranger nodded seriously, then approached Claire. "Your son mentioned you're concerned about getting your horse back to your vehicle. We've arranged for one of our park horses to be brought along the trail. I can ride him and lead Midnight back to the station." Claire thanked her, touched by the thoughtfulness. As they began the hike back, with Rangers Mitchell and Cardoza carrying the few belongings they'd salvaged, Claire found herself walking alongside Ranger Lynn and Midnight. "Your horse is quite exceptional," the ranger commented. "Animals can sense things we can't, but it still takes a special bond for one to lead its humans to safety." "We've always been close," Claire replied, watching as Midnight picked his way carefully along the muddy trail. "But I never imagined he'd save our lives." They reached a junction in the trail where another ranger waited with a saddled horse. Ranger Lynn mounted smoothly and took Midnight's lead rope. "I'll meet you back at the station," she assured Claire. As they continued their journey, The devastation from the storm became increasingly apparent. Trees were down everywhere, streams had overflowed their banks, and debris littered the trails. Rangers Cardoza and Michel maintained a steady stream of conversation with the children, pointing out how nature would recover and regenerate after the destruction. Claire walked slightly behind the group, lost in thought. Her marriage, unlike the forest, might not recover from this storm. Richard's betrayal had uprooted something fundamental in their relationship. Something she wasn't sure could be replanted. When they finally arrived at the main ranger station, Claire steeled herself for the confrontation to come. Richard was visible through the windows, pacing anxiously in the main room. When the door opened and the children entered, he froze, his face a mask of disbelief. "Claire? Kids?" His voice broke as he rushed toward them, arms outstretched. The children hesitated, looking to their mother for guidance. Claire nodded slightly, giving them permission to accept their father's embrace. Whatever had happened between the adults, she wouldn't prevent Richard from reassuring himself that his children were safe. "I thought you were dead," Richard sobbed, holding the children tightly. "The tree fell, and I couldn't see the tent anymore, and I panicked, and—" "Stop," Claire said quietly but firmly. "Not now, Richard. Not in front of the children." Richard looked up, seeming to really see her for the first time. His face crumpled further. "Claire, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I froze. I've never been so terrified in my life." Claire maintained her composure, though inside she was churning with emotions. "We need to discuss our plans. The rangers say there might be cabins available if we want to continue our trip." Richard blinked in confusion. "Continue? After what happened?" "The children want to," Claire explained. "They were enjoying themselves before the storm, and they don't want it ruined." Lily spoke up, her voice stronger than Claire had expected. "Midnight saved us, Dad. He found a cabin in the woods when our tent got broken." "The horse?" Richard looked bewildered. "What do you mean he found a cabin?" "He knew where to go," James added. "He pulled Mom through the forest to a ranger cabin. That's how he called for help." Richard's gaze shifted to the window, where Ranger Lynn was just arriving with Midnight in tow. "I don't understand." "There's a lot you don't understand right now," Claire said softly. "But the fact is, when you drove away and left us to die, our horse led us to safety. Remember that the next time you want to complain about having him around." Richard flinched at her words but didn't argue. "You want to stay here? After everything?" "We do," Claire confirmed. "The children and I want to salvage something positive from this trip. You're welcome to join us, or you can take the car and go home. Your choice." It was a test, and they both knew it. Not a fair one, perhaps, but necessary. Richard looked from Claire to the children, then back again, clearly struggling with himself. "I'll stay," he said finally. "If you'll let me." Claire nodded, not trusting herself to speak. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was an acknowledgement that he deserved a chance to make amends. If only for the children's sake. Ranger Mitchell approached with news that a park cabin was indeed available, about 2 miles from their original campsite. It was more rustic than they were used to, but had a wood stove, beds, and a small kitchen. Most importantly, there was a corral for Midnight. They spent the rest of the day retrieving what could be salvaged from their devastated campsite and settling into the cabin. Richard worked tirelessly, carrying supplies, chopping firewood, and preparing a comfortable space for Midnight, as if physical labor could somehow atone for his momentary cowardice. That evening, after the children were asleep in the cabin's small loft, Claire and Richard sat on the porch, the silence between them heavy with unspoken recriminations and apologies. "I keep seeing it," Richard said finally, staring into the darkness. "The tree falling, the tent collapsing. I was certain you were all dead." "But you didn't check," Claire pointed out, her voice calm despite the anger simmering beneath. "You didn't come back to make sure. You just drove away." Richard hung his head. "I've never experienced fear like that before. It was like something took over my body and I couldn't control it. I've always been the one in charge, the one making decisions, the one protecting everyone else. But in that moment I just broke." Claire considered his words. There was truth in them. Richard had always been the strong one, the provider, the protector. His entire identity was built around being successful and in control. The storm had stripped that away, revealing a frightened man unable to face his own vulnerability. "Fear does strange things to people," she acknowledged. "But Richard, you left your children to die. How do I ever trust you again after that?" He had no answer, and Claire didn't expect one. Some breaches of trust couldn't be repaired with words alone. "Midnight didn't have our advantages," she continued after a moment. "He doesn't have our intelligence or reach, our resources. He was just as frightened as you were. But he stayed. He protected us. He found a way to help." Richard glanced toward the corral where Midnight was visible in the moonlight, peacefully grazing. "I've never liked that horse," he admitted. "I was jealous of how much attention you gave him, how much the kids adored him. Now, I owe him everything." "We all do," Claire agreed. The conversation lapsed into silence again, but something had shifted. No resolution had been reached, no forgiveness granted, but a door had been left fractionally open, not for things to return to how they were before, but for something new to potentially grow from the wreckage. The next morning brought sunshine and a sense of new beginning. The children were eager to explore the area around their cabin, and Claire suggested a short ride on Summer. "Midnight. Can Dad come too?" Lily asked, watching Richard carefully prepare breakfast, another attempt at atonement. Claire hesitated, then nodded. "If he wants to." Richard looked up, surprised by the inclusion. "I'd like that very much." They took turns riding Midnight along a gentle trail that followed a bubbling stream. Richard went last, clearly nervous around the large animal, but determined to overcome his fear. Midnight, for his part, seemed to sense Richard's apprehension and moved with deliberate steadiness, neither too fast nor too slow. "He's a good teacher," Claire observed as Richard dismounted at the end of the trail. "Patient with beginners." Richard stroked the horse's neck cautiously. "Thank you," he said to the animal, the words clearly meant for more than just the ride. The remaining days of their vacation passed with a delicate balance of activities and emotions. The children bounced back quickly, their resilience both heartening and humbling to the adults. They went fishing in a nearby pond, hiked shorter trails recommended by the rangers, and spent evenings around the campfire telling stories. Richard remained subdued, his usual confidence replaced by a thoughtful humility that Claire found both unfamiliar and intriguing. He devoted special attention to Midnight, bringing the horse treats and spending time grooming him each morning. On their final evening, as they packed for the return home the next day, Claire found Richard sitting alone on a fallen log near the cabin, staring at the sunset. "Room for one more?" she asked, gesturing to the log. Richard moved over immediately. "Always." They sat in companionable silence, watching as the sky transformed from blue to fiery orange and pink. In the corral, Midnight moved languidly, occasionally lifting his head to catch the cooling evening breeze. "I've been thinking about what happened," Richard said eventually. "Not just during the storm, but before that too. I've been running away for a long time, haven't I? From you, from the kids, from anything that made me feel vulnerable or not in control." Claire nodded, appreciating his insight. "Your work became your safety zone. The irony is that I thought I was providing safety for all of you by focusing on being successful. But when you really needed me to be brave, I failed completely. We're all afraid of something, Richard. The question is, what we do with that fear." He turned to look at her directly. "I know things can't go back to how they were before. I wouldn't want them to, actually. But I hope we can find a way forward, together." Claire didn't respond immediately, letting the weight of his words settle between them. The breach of trust was still raw, but she couldn't deny that something had shifted in Richard during this trip. Whether it would last beyond their return to normal life remained to be seen. "We'll take it one day at a time," she said finally. "That's all I can promise right now." Richard nodded, accepting her terms. One day at a time. The soft nickering drew their attention. Midnight had approached the fence nearest them, his intelligent eyes seemingly watching their interaction. "That horse understands more than he lets on," Richard commented, a hint of his old humor returning. Claire smiled. the first genuine smile she'd directed at Richard since the storm. He's definitely earned his place in the family. They returned to the cabin as darkness fell, joining the children who were organizing their belongings for tomorrow's departure. The conversation flowed more easily than it had in days, focusing on memories they wanted to preserve from the trip the rainbow trout Lily had caught, the family of deer they'd spotted on a hike, the constellations they'd identified from the cabin porch. The storm and Richard's abandonment weren't mentioned, but they remained present in subtle ways in the respectful space Richard gave Claire when she tensed at his proximity, in the way the children looked to their mother first for direction, and the extra attention everyone paid to Midnight's needs and comfort. Morning brought misty mountains and the bittersweet task of departure. They loaded their belongings into the SUV and horse trailer, taking a final look at the cabin that had been their home for these transformative days. "I wish we could stay longer," James sighed, kicking at a pine cone near his feet. "We'll come back," Claire promised, catching Richard's eye. "Maybe make it a yearly tradition." Richard nodded, understanding the significance of her words. "I'd like that." The drive home was quieter than their journey to the park had been, each family member processing their experiences in their own way. When they crested the final hill and their estate came into view, Claire felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. Would the changes they'd begun in the wilderness survive the return to civilization? As they unpacked and settled back into their home, small signs suggested they might. Richard canceled his overseas business trip scheduled for the following week, delegating the responsibilities to his VP. He helped the children unpack their camping gear and listened attentively as they recounted their adventures to the housekeeper. Claire, meanwhile, took Midnight to his stable, spending extra time ensuring he was comfortable after the journey. As she brushed his gleaming coat, she spoke softly to him. "You changed everything, you know, not just by saving us, but by showing us what courage really looks like." The horse nickered softly, nudging her hand with his muzzle. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, Claire found Richard in his home office. Typically, this would have been his retreat, door closed as he caught up on work missed during their absence. But tonight, the door stood open, and instead of his laptop, Richard was looking at family photos arranged on his desk. "May I come in?" Claire asked from the doorway. Richard looked up, surprise and pleasure crossing his face. "Of course." Claire entered, noticing small changes to the normally sterile space. Richard's expensive ergonomic chair had been pushed aside in favor of a comfortable reading chair by the window. Books that had been purely decorative on shelves were now open on side tables, bookmarks suggesting actual use. "I've been thinking," Richard said, setting down the framed photo he'd been examining their family at James's last birthday. "I'd like to make some changes. I'm going to step back from day-to-day operations at the company, take on more of an advisory role." Claire raised her eyebrows. "That's a big decision. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Richard replied. "When I thought I'd lost you all, it clarified everything. None of it matters without you." He paused, swallowing hard. "I know I haven't earned your forgiveness yet. I know trust takes time to rebuild, but I want the chance to try." Claire studied the man before her, still recognizably the ambitious, confident Richard Holloway, but with new dimensions revealed by crisis and reflection. He hadn't become someone else entirely that would have been neither plausible nor desirable. But something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of himself and what truly mattered. "Forgiveness is a process," she said carefully. "I can't promise how long it will take or what our relationship will look like at the end of it, but I'm willing to walk that path with you." Relief flooded Richard's face. "That's all I ask." A soft knock on the office door interrupted them. Lily stood in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep. "I had a bad dream," she said, eyes darting uncertainly between her parents. In the past, Richard would have gently directed her back to Claire, claiming important work to finish. Tonight, he opened his arms. "Want to tell me about it?" Lily hesitated only briefly before coming to him, climbing into his lap as she hadn't done in years. "The storm came back, but this time Midnight couldn't find us." Richard held her close. "That's a scary dream. But you know what? Even if Midnight hadn't found the cabin, the Rangers would have come looking for us when the storm passed. And I? He faltered, then continued with determination. I would have come back for you. I should have never left. Claire watched silently as Lily studied her father's face. Children had an uncanny ability to detect insincerity, and Richard's words would mean nothing if his daughter didn't believe them. After a long moment, Lily nodded, apparently accepting his declaration. Can I sleep in your room tonight? Claire stepped forward, reaching for both of them. Of course you can, sweetie. Let's go check on your brother first. Together, the three of them walked down the hallway to James's room, where they found him awake and sitting by his window. Couldn't sleep? Claire asked gently. James shook his head. I keep thinking about midnight. Do you think he knows he saved us? Richard knelt beside his son's chair. I think animals understand more than we give them credit for. Especially the special ones. He's definitely special, James agreed. Can we go see him? Just for a minute? It was well past midnight, but Claire found herself nodding. Just a quick visit. The family made their way through the quiet house and across the moonlit lawn to the stables. Midnight was awake, ears perking forward at their approach. He nickered softly in greeting. He remembers the storm too, Lily whispered, reaching to stroke his muzzle. But he's not scared anymore. That's because he's home, with the people who love him, Claire replied, watching as the horse gently nuzzled each family member in turn. When midnight reached Richard, he paused longer, seeming to study the man with intelligent eyes. Richard held out his hand, palm flat, with a small apple he'd grabbed from the kitchen. Thank you, he said simply. Midnight accepted the offering, then pushed his head against Richard's chest in what almost seemed like forgiveness. Richard's hand came up to stroke the horse's neck, the touch no longer hesitant but confident and grateful. Claire observed the interaction, seeing in it a metaphor for their family's journey broken by storm, guided to safety by unexpected grace. And now taking tentative steps toward healing. The path forward remained uncertain, but they would walk it together, one day at a time. As they returned to the house, the children's fears soothed by the stable visit, Claire found Richard's hand reaching for hers in the darkness. She hesitated briefly, then accepted the contact, their fingers intertwining in a gesture both familiar and new. Some storms came with warning, while others arose suddenly, testing foundations and revealing hidden strengths and weaknesses. This storm had nearly destroyed them, but had also cleared away pretenses and illusions, creating space for authentic growth. Whether their marriage would ultimately survive remained to be seen, but standing in the quiet moonlight, surrounded by the family they'd created together, Claire felt a cautious hope take root alongside her lingering hurt, and in the stable behind them, Midnight watched them go. His role in their story complete, but his place in their family forever secured. The silent hero who'd led them not just to physical safety, but toward a deeper understanding of courage, loyalty, and love. Richard Holloway had left his family during a storm, an act of fear and weakness that could never be completely erased. But through the wisdom of an animal and the resilience of the human heart, they had found a path toward redemption, not by forgetting what had happened, but by learning from it, growing beyond it, and choosing each day to be brave enough to stay, even when the way forward seemed uncertain. As they reached, the house, Richard paused, looking back at the moonlit stable one last time. Life's storms reveal who we truly are, he said quietly. I didn't like what I saw in myself that night. The important thing isn't who we are in our worst moments, Claire replied, but who we choose to become afterward. She squeezed his hand gently. Come on, let's get these kids back to bed. Together, they walked into the house, closing the door on the night, but not on the lessons it had taught them. Lessons about the unpredictability of nature, the fragility of human courage, and the unexpected ways that salvation sometimes arrives on 4 legs, instead of 2. In the stable, Midnight settled back into his stall, mission accomplished. The humans would figure the rest out for themselves. They usually did, eventually. Until then, he would be there steady, patient, and ready to lead them to safety whenever the next storm arrived.